He was the first man in U.S. history to hijack a plane for ransom. He leapt out of a commercial jet.
A man in a business suit walked onto a plane with a briefcase, a fake name, and a demand that would haunt American law enforcement for over 5 decades. He asked for $200,000 for parachutes, and one thing no one could give him, the ability to disappear completely. For 54 years, he got his wish. But a retired airline captain with a YouTube channel and an obsession he couldn't shake may have just found the one piece of evidence the FBI never had. Today, we're breaking down how the case of D.B. Cooper, America's only unsolved skyjacking, cracked wide open, and why the answer may have been sitting in a family shed the entire time. It was the day before Thanksgiving, 1971. Portland International Airport was packed with holiday travelers, and Northwest Orient Flight 305 was supposed to be a routine 30-minute hop up to Seattle. A man calling himself Dan Cooper boarded in a dark suit and sunglasses, ordered a bourbon and soda once airborne, and then quietly handed a note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. She assumed it was a phone number. It wasn't. Cooper leaned in and said the words that would define the rest of his life, and hers. He had a bomb in his briefcase, and he wanted it taken seriously. He cracked the case open just enough to show a tangle of wires and cylinders. Whether it was real or not, nobody on that plane was willing to find out. His demands were specific and calm, like a man who had rehearsed them: $200,000 in unmarked $20 bills, 2 back parachutes, and 2 front reserve chutes, delivered the moment the plane touched down in Seattle. The pilot alerted air traffic control using a hijacking code, and within minutes the FBI was involved. By the time Flight 305 landed, the passengers were released unharmed, the money and parachutes were handed over, and the plane took off again with only a skeleton crew, Cooper's orders. Somewhere over the storm-battered forests of southwest Washington, with rain lashing the fuselage and the plane's rear stairs lowered into the dark, Cooper strapped on a parachute, took the cash, and jumped into the night. He was never seen again. He left behind only his tie, tucked into a seatback, as if he no longer needed it where he was going. The manhunt that followed was one of the largest in FBI history. Agents, state troopers, and volunteers combed the forests near the Washogal River for weeks. Helicopters swept the treetops. Bloodhounds worked the underbrush. And they found nothing, not a scrap of parachute silk, not a footprint, not a single strand of physical evidence tying anyone to the jump. A media error along the way turned Dan Cooper into D.B. Cooper, and the misnamed hijacker became a folk legend almost overnight. Over the following decades, the FBI investigated more than 1,000 suspects. Confessions came and went, most of them false. The only real break came 9 years later, in 1980, when a young boy digging in the sand along the Columbia River uncovered 3 decaying bundles of $20 bills, later confirmed as part of Cooper's ransom. It proved the money had ended up in the river, but it didn't explain how, or whether Cooper had survived the jump at all. By 2016, after 45 years without a solid lead, the FBI officially shelved the case, though it was never technically closed to new evidence. While the official investigation gathered dust, a retired airline captain named Dan Grider kept working the case on his own time. With more than 2 decades of flight experience and a background that gave him a pilot's eye for detail the FBI's original investigators sometimes lacked, Grider had spent years building a YouTube channel around aviation history and analysis. The Cooper case pulled him in and never let go. Grider wasn't chasing internet fame. He was reworking flight paths, studying wind patterns over the jump zone, poring over declassified FBI files, and re-examining a name that had circled the edges of the Cooper case for 50 years without ever sticking: Richard Floyd McCoy. That search eventually led him to a property in Cove City, North Carolina, that had belonged to McCoy's mother. Inside an old outbuilding, Grider found a modified military-style parachute rig, along with a harness and a skydiving logbook. To most people, it would have looked like forgotten junk. To Grider, it looked like a 1 in a billion match to the specifications investigators had recorded about Cooper's equipment back in 1971. On paper, Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. looked like the last person capable of a federal hijacking. He was a devout Mormon, a decorated Vietnam veteran who had served as a demolitions expert and later a helicopter pilot, a husband and father, and a law student at Brigham Young University. He was also, by most accounts, an exceptionally skilled recreational skydiver. 5 months after Cooper vanished, on April 7, 1972, McCoy boarded United Airlines Flight 855 in Denver. Using a strikingly similar playbook, he passed a note to a flight attendant, claimed to be armed, and demanded parachutes and cash, $500,000 this time. After the ransom was delivered in San Francisco, he ordered the plane back into the air and jumped over Utah. Unlike Cooper, McCoy made mistakes. He left a handwritten note in the cockpit and his fingerprints turned up on items in the cabin. The FBI matched the prints within days and arrested him at his home in Provo. He was sentenced to 45 years, but in 1974 he escaped from a Pennsylvania penitentiary. 3 months later, agents tracked him down, a shootout followed, and McCoy was killed. Investigators at the time noticed the obvious parallels between the two hijackings: the same aircraft model, the same rear stairs escape, the same calm, no-passing style. But the FBI ultimately ruled McCoy out as a Cooper suspect, citing differences in age, build, and the descriptions given by witnesses on Flight 305. Several flight attendants who had interacted with Cooper were shown photos of McCoy afterward and said he wasn't the man. That conclusion held for decades, but it never fully closed the door either. FOIA documents later revealed that as recently as 2004, the FBI was still quietly trying to obtain a DNA sample from McCoy's family. For years, McCoy's 2 children, Shantae and Richard III, kept their suspicions to themselves. According to Grider, he tried reaching out to the family for roughly 2 decades before they were willing to talk. Their reason for staying quiet, they later said, wasn't about protecting a secret from the world, it was about protecting their mother, Karen, who they believed may have played some role in the aftermath of the Denver hijacking. It wasn't until after she passed away that the siblings felt they could finally speak, and finally hand over what had been sitting in storage all along. That's when the parachute Grider had documented on camera caught the attention of federal investigators. After his videos gained traction, the FBI reached out. In September 2023, Grider and Richard McCoy III traveled to an FBI office in Richmond, Virginia, where agents took the parachute, the harness, and the skydiving logbook into evidence for forensic analysis. It was reportedly the first active step the Bureau had taken on the Cooper case since officially deprioritizing it in 2016. This is where the story gets more complicated than a tidy Hollywood ending. The rig Grider found matched several details investigators had recorded about Cooper's parachute back in 1971, modifications consistent with a military surplus canopy converted for sport use, the kind McCoy, an experienced jumper and skydiving instructor, would have known how to configure. Some retired FBI personnel connected to the original case, including an agent who had been involved in the McCoy shootout, have said publicly that they now believe McCoy was Cooper. But belief isn't proof, and the FBI itself has never confirmed the connection. After roughly 2 years of forensic testing, the agency quietly returned the parachute and related items to the McCoy family in December 2025, without releasing a public conclusion. According to Richard McCoy III, an agent told him the Bureau had gathered as much data as it could from the materials but wasn't able to offer a specific finding either way. Other former agents familiar with FBI procedure have noted that returning evidence like this is often a sign the results were inconclusive rather than confirmatory. There has also been discussion of exhuming McCoy's body to obtain a DNA sample that could be compared against the partial genetic material recovered decades ago from the Ty Cooper left behind on the plane. As of now, there's no public confirmation that this has happened, or what it found if it has. So where does that leave the mystery? Officially, right where it's been for years, unsolved. The FBI has not named Richard McCoy as D.B. Cooper. What has changed is that, for the first time in nearly a decade, the Bureau treated a piece of physical evidence seriously enough to test it, and a family that stayed silent for 50 years finally said out loud what they'd long believed about their father. Whether or not McCoy was ultimately behind the mask, his story adds an unsettling layer to the Cooper myth. Here was a man who, by every outward measure, was living the ideal of quiet American respectability, soldier, husband, student, churchgoer, while allegedly carrying out one of the boldest crimes of the century, and then watching a nearly identical copy of his own plan get pinned on someone the FBI could never find. It raises questions that go beyond the case file. Why would a man with everything to lose risk it all for a crime with no guarantee of survival? Was it about the money, or about proving something to himself? Was the botched second hijacking an act of arrogance, assuming he could get away with it twice, or evidence that these weren't actually the same person at all, just two men with similar training reaching for the same idea? What we do know is that Dan Greider's years of independent digging accomplished something the official investigation hadn't managed in almost a decade. It got the FBI to open the file again, however cautiously. Whether that ends in a DNA match, another dead end, or years more of ambiguity, the case has a pulse again after a long stretch of silence. For half a century, D.B. Cooper existed as pure absence, a name with no face, a crime with no ending. Now there's a face attached to the theory, a family willing to speak, and a federal agency willing to at least look. That's not the same as a solved case. But for a mystery that has resisted every lead for 54 years, it might be the closest anyone has come. What do you think? Was Richard McCoy the man who vanished into the Pacific Northwest sky in 1971, or just the closest echo of him the world has found? Let us know in the comments, and if you want to keep following where this story goes next, make sure you're subscribed.